Welcome back, everyone. It is good to be with you in this new year. I know things might be a little unpredictable. We might be feeling a little wobbly, and we are committed here to keep bringing you practitioners and practices that can help you to stay calm, centered, and be a little softer with yourself and others as we venture into the unknown. And today I have that person for you, someone very special who has helped me a lot through his book, through his course, which was essential for me as I worked on my book, and through all his practices that he offers. And that is David Treleaven, who is a writer, an educator, and a leading expert on the intersection of mindfulness and trauma. He's the author of Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness Practices for Safe and Transformative Healing. He trains mindfulness, yoga, and mental health professionals to integrate trauma sensitive principles into their work. He has over a decade of experience, and he has collaborated with organizations like the Center for Mindful Self Compassion and universities, including Brown and UCLA, helping practitioners create safer and more effective spaces for healing. David can be found at davidtreleaven.com. And I just want to tell you about his course, which I took. He has a full, like we said, it's like a university level course, the complete trauma sensitive mindfulness training, um, and it's full with recordings, practices, homeworks, PDFs. It's dense. It's a really, really great course. I took it, the trauma sensitive mindfulness and the advanced. He's got some great guest speakers there as well. It's hours and hours of training, again, that I use myself, and I think we could all benefit from. So make sure you take a look at his site, take a look at that course, and he's offering a special for folks when you use my code, which is Lara, Lara. So if you do decide to do the complete trauma sensitive mindfulness training, just go ahead and put in Lara for a special discount. Um, and if you have any questions about the course, like I said, I did it. I would get up early in the morning, 5 a.m. to do that course, and I use many, many things from it in teaching trauma sensitive yoga and in just the way that I approach mindfulness meditation and working with folks, even in therapy. David also has another course coming up. Which you'll hear us talk about, is moving into another really interesting space, combining IFS with mindfulness and trauma sensitivity. And there's a course starting, I think when you hear this, it's going to be tomorrow, his new course. And that's going to be a live course with internal family systems. So, another great thing to look out for. And like I said, I would highly recommend anything David puts out there. He has a beautiful community who believe in him, and you're going to hear for yourself and see for yourself why, just by feeling his energy through this recording, through our conversation. We talked today about what got him into trauma sensitive mindfulness and where his thought process has gone on these practices, how it's evolved through the years. We share our own practices. I share some of my own thoughts. It was a really natural, beautiful, gentle conversation, and I'm glad you're here to take it in. So here we go. David, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here with you, Lara. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited after years of inviting you that I finally got you on.
I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
I'm a student of yours. I was introduced to your book by my husband when I was working on my book, Trauma Sensitive Yoga. And he said, "Oh, you have to know David's work." And then I did both your courses, your beginner and advanced course on trauma sensitive mindfulness, and you've influenced me quite a lot.
Happy to. That's great. That's always that makes the whole thing worthwhile. So yeah, I'm
And
happy
you
to
have a
chat.
great community as well. I love when you do your like meetups.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I feel lucky for it's I feel like it's when people come and they meet the people who are in the community, it's like a really sincere group of people that are wanting to do good work, and of which, you're a part, and others come in and out anyway. So yeah, I'm really happy to meet people and chat about things, and I'm glad for the work you're doing around trauma sensitive yoga too. I think that's super important and different realm from me, but trauma informed work is really important, I think.
Yeah, and there's some overlap. I'm curious how you got into trauma-informed mindfulness.
I came at it as someone who was a practitioner. I wonder if the same for you, where I was meditating a lot. I got really stuck, honestly, at one point, and then had a teacher and a couple friends suggest, they're like, "Oh, have you thought about kind of your own history here?" And I had not associated a lot of life experiences with trauma, but I ended up going to a somatic experiencing practitioner, which is a really popular approach to trauma that you might know. And I found the tools were super helpful, and I wish that I had had them. And so that opened up this whole inquiry for me around, if I was to look at meditation through the lens of trauma and through the lens of trauma informed practice, or even just trauma therapy, what would people say about it? And that became a dissertation, which became a book, which became a whole path for me, which was really unexpected. And it's really just because I was stuck in my own thing, and it's like, what would I have wished? Which tools I wished I had have had? Um, and and so it's been a real ride. I'm happy to be here.
Can you share a little bit more about what makes trauma-sensitive mindfulness different than mindfulness that's not trauma sensitive?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm curious for you too how you see it, because I feel like, when did your book come out again?
2 years ago now.
Two. So I don't even know if
Yeah.
you've seen this. I feel like a lot has changed
Yeah.
in the last couple of years. And my book came out 5 years ago. And I was trying to really reach teachers who didn't have much understanding of trauma, really just with the encouragement to not double down with
Yeah.
meditation practice. And I think that's changed a lot. I think there's a lot more awareness now about that for people that are struggling with trauma. Meditation, basic meditation instruction alone will not always be enough. People often need different tools to work with a dysregulated nervous system, work with flashbacks, things like that. So it was really just trying to raise consciousness. So, in terms of what it looks like, again, I'm curious for you with yoga. It's like, it's the teachers that I teach, it's mostly that they have this information in the background. It's a skill for them to hold, or a competency, that they know that if someone was struggling with trauma in the room that they were teaching or online, they'd be able to respond effectively. So it doesn't even always look that different.
Mm,
It's more that there's a safety net there that wasn't there, like a competent safety net,
mhm.
versus just someone who, just kind of being more cavalier about it. Do you see similar things around yoga, or like, how does it look that different?
I think it's a lot about how it's offered, like the language of choice,
Right. Right.
um, and the trust in the practitioner that they know what's right for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Similarly, it's really, I was just on with a group of teachers, meditation teachers who are also educators. And it's a group called Whole School Mindfulness, and they're doing work. And the whole intention of the session was this, not to freak people out and think, okay, trauma's, if you run into trauma, red alarm bells are going to go off. It's actually more that it's empowering people, both the teachers and the participants that are trying on these practices. So I'm with you. It's like, choice is a great example. It's like letting people know, yeah, you're in choice. You don't have to just blindly do these practices. At the same time, my focus the last couple of years has been not coddling people. Sometimes
Mhm.
people can hear this work and assume that it's like we should walk on eggshells. And to me, the practice is very fierce. It's about being present with potentially overwhelming experiences and teaching people how to do that. They just might need some additional support, and that's been my focus.
Yeah. I think you're speaking to, like, the pendulum went so far, the other way, and you were speaking at a time when people weren't aware that and one of the core things that you, I think, say in your training that's always stuck with me is recognizing that there's trauma in every room, there's a survivor in every room, and just that awareness alone. And now that's we're so sensitive to it, we might forget that trauma survivors are survivors. They're
Right.
they actually know how to survive, so we don't have to coddle them, as you're saying.
Absolutely. I love that. That's been a big focus for me the last, I'd say 6 to 12 months, as I've kind of took a little break from this work and then came back. And one of the things I've been thinking about and talking about is what is this way between deeply acknowledging someone's trauma? Yes, as you said, like trauma will be in the room on some level. It doesn't mean that someone's always worse for wear, but there's some level of trauma exposure that will have happened because of life. And how do we both acknowledge that deeply and empathize, but not overprotect people and
Mm,
not go so far as you're saying, where we're coddling people, we're treating them as fragile? I'm afraid sometimes when I hear teachers talk about education and trigger warnings, that it's flipped too far towards somehow conveying the message that people don't have the grit and resilience to tolerate the vicissitudes of life. And I'm like, I don't want that. I That's not what I'm down for. So I don't know about you. I'm trying to find that third way of like really dignifying trauma, but at the same time not coddling people. And I think people are interested in how to do that well.
yeah. Some language that you use is being with and working with.
Hmm.
Maybe you could speak to that, and does that sort of align with this third way?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for bringing that in. That was a big unlock for me. So that came from Rick Hansen, who some of your listeners might know, who does just a lot of work. He had a really deep meditation practice, and then I think as a psychologist, he's more interested in um, what practices support people. Anyway, I love his work, and I was talking to him about this maybe 4 years ago, and he said, "Oh, this is something that I wrote about around the difference between working with and being with." Basically, the idea is that being with is the skill of mindfulness, that you're helping people, if you're a teacher or you're a coach or therapist, that you're helping people to be with something without changing it, which is so radical, I think, for many of us. Like, can you be with the grief? Can you be with
Yeah.
the overwhelm? And he was saying just that alone, being with, is not a skill that helps people untangle. Sometimes we need to purposely help people shift their experience and their state. And so we work with it, and that's a lot of psychotherapy is like tools. The thing that the big aha for me was, he said, if you go too far in either direction, you'll run into trouble. If you're just being with, then you've gone taken that to extreme. You would just always tell someone to take it back to the cushion, for example, in meditation. Whereas if you're just working with, you're never actually slowing down to really be present with the different sensations and the different stimuli that are there and experiences. So, and those people, I don't know if you ever have that, where people they're just constantly throwing tools at it,
Yes.
and so it's like, where's the sweet spot? So I do think that's the third way, and it's super dynamic and it's hard to find. And that's why I still train people, is like, it's a work in progress. And I'm a learner all the time. It's not something that you can write in stone.
Oh my goodness. As I'm working towards um, my mental health degree, and working with clients now, this is something I'm thinking about all the time. It's just like being with them in session, and then, and then when is it appropriate to bring in a tool? And which one do they need? Do they need someone just sitting with them and being with the pain and being with what's arising and not trying to get past it and fix it? That's sometimes what's needed, and sometimes what's needed is some kind of intervention, some kind of tool.
Absolutely. That's the art of it to me. And
Yeah.
then how do you know? How do you know when? I mean, I'm curious what you're learning. Like, how are you? That's the art of it to me. Like, how do you know when to lean in, when to back off? Like, how's that going for you?
I think the years of yoga and meditation and mindfulness are so supportive in that,
Nice.
now in this new role as a counselor,
Yeah,
um, because of all those lessons of being present in my own body. What am I noticing? Is
absolutely.
always there with me. Yeah.
Totally. Totally.
So you mentioned somatic experiencing as well as influencing like how you look at mindfulness now with that trauma sensitive lens. What are the tools from that that you've brought in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, somatic experiencing is a really powerful approach to trauma work in my experience. And the main headline of that work is you don't invite people to go directly at their trauma typically, whereas in exposure therapy or different approaches you might really directly and immediately invite people right in and say we're going to get into what's challenging for you. But in somatic experiencing, you're saying it's possible that people could end up becoming overwhelmed if they go, it could be too much too fast. If you invite people into contact with traumatic sensations, memories, images, things like that. So, what SE does, somatic experiencing, is it will tend to go first towards something that's more resourcing. This is a general philosophy or principle in that work, at least when I was taking that work 12 or 15 years ago. And that really spoke out to me. Like there was a moment that I had with my SE therapist. You've probably heard me say this, but the first session they were like, "What's working for you? What has you feel good?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? Why would I care about that?" But they were like, "No, that's actually going to be the doorway to your capacity to be with difficulty is to be with also what's working for you." And that really just set off some light bulbs inside of like, well, what does it mean to purposefully pay attention to what's working, not to just try to get away from what's difficult, but to increase our capacity to be with, which to me was why mindfulness based stress reduction was so powerful 35 years ago, or almost longer now, with John Kabat Zinn, where he was working with chronic pain people. And they were like, there's nowhere else to go but in and be with this. Of course, we can have tools, but that you need to like actually be with, which is so hard and uncomfortable. And so anyway, that's been some of my thinking around it.
I like that. I mean, I like the it's strengths based,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
know, really that's strengths based. That's like you know what works for you or where feels good, what calms you. Again, it's like reminding people of their own internal knowledge, their own agency, like to discover for themselves what works. And that becomes, I think this is what you're referring to with the somatic experiencing. It's like when we use tools like pendulation, we come back to that more resourced, more comfortable place. And then we can work with the more difficult places and
Yeah.
then know that we have that place to come back to.
That's right. Yeah, we need both skills. We need being with and working with. And part of the, not the argument I've had, but part of my case in the with this work is to say um, there will be moments in someone's journey around healing trauma that they're going to need to work with someone in a very close one-to-one way who's tracking their nervous system, who's working with tools like you're just naming around pendulation, meaning like that you're actually able to oscillate back and forth between places where you feel more resilient and resourced and places you feel like you're struggling. And that there's just times where we can't be alone in that. And whether it's on a yoga mat or on a meditation cushion, there are times where we go, okay, I need help here. And there's other times where we can really figure it out on our own. So I'm
Yeah.
interested in where's the line, where are the moments, and often I think it's a dynamic path that is it's ever changing along the way.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. It's like we can learn from, from teachers, from people who have been down the path of meditation and mindfulness. Um, I mean, we can always learn from folks who are more studied in a skill, right?
Hmm.
And also from the way what they can see in us that we can't see in ourselves. I mean, that's a great thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. This teacher today on this group that I was with, she was talking about when she's working with dysregulated students as a mindfulness teacher, the power of lending her nervous system and her own regulation to
Mm.
someone else, just to say basically like, you can feel me, I'm right here. And and doing that purposefully as a
Mm.
way to help someone, not to rescue them, of course, like they need to learn that themselves. But yeah, so I think you're right. We need each other, and it's often that we don't heal in isolation, and we need help. But then it's tricky because I don't know how you could think about yoga, but mindfulness is often a solitary path. It's like we're practicing deeply, deeply with ourselves. So learning how to navigate that is also super tricky.
So much both and, right?
It's totally both and absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
We talk about nervous system, like lending the nervous system. Whenever I hear you speak, Dave, and whenever I'm able to, spend time with you, that's the first thing that I notice about you is you're so gentle and um, I don't know, like you're in it. I can feel the that you've done the work,
Mm.
and then I immediately feel calmer myself.
Hmm. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. I I have that experience too with people where I take a breath with them and you can feel their presence. It's wild, isn't it? On Zoom too, or across time, you can really feel it. And so, yeah, thanks for saying that. And then I'm curious of like, I always get curious with people. I'm like, what are the practices that support us getting to do that in a very like dysregulating world that many of us are in? How do we do that? So, yeah, thanks
So
for saying
how
that.
have you gotten like
Yeah,
this?
that's a great question. Well, part of it is I'm Canadian. So I think there's that cultural shaping that we all have that will impact each other differently. But I think I'm pretty gentle by nature. And honestly, I've had some good teachers. One of the things that's been helpful for me is the branch of somatic psychology and yoga as well, but really a path that is inviting me over and over again into sensations
Mm,
and to be able to be present with whatever comes up. Like, I could feel whenever I'm speaking, I'm really trying to just be myself. But then of course I get a little picked up when the red light comes on, like, can I want to be smart, or these parts come in. I'm like, okay, I can feel that wave come of I get a little tense or a little gripped. And I feel now with practice, it's like I can just try to come to my back and my belly and my butt and my feet and just show up well,
mm,
or just show up as myself. That's my goal. And I think
mm.
we're helping each other do this all the time. Even just us talking right now. So that's been a big one for me is this somatics, which is like just coming back into my body over and over again. I'll say one more thing is, I talk about this window of tolerance that comes up in some of my training, which comes from Dan Siegel, and people might know it. I probably will. But this idea that we all have a window where we can tolerate stress and stay connected to ourselves and others. And I had a conversation with someone about that the best teachers have really wide windows, that
Mm.
they're able to be present with whatever shows up. And and that's really what I'm saying. That's another version of what I just said is like a wave of nervousness comes. I can be with it instead of checking out. So that's some of what's been helpful for me.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. I've noticed that my capacity build to be with other people's stuff.
Yeah,
Um, I can hold a lot more, and I'm not as tired by that as I used to be.
absolutely.
Um, and I think that comes with time and practice.
Totally. I do. The effort. Yeah, I was just talking to someone about Aikido, and they were talking about just being able to be effortless in your work, and I think the older I get, the more it's just like I have less effort as a therapist, as a teacher. I just don't have to work as hard. And I just saw Dan Siegel presenting, and I was like, oh, he's just really relaxed. He's done this with time and practice. It's just so relaxing. So
Oh my gosh, I love that. My my yoga teacher who just passed unexpectedly, that was one of his real gifts. Was when he touched you, it was like he was so relaxed.
hmm.
He was so relaxed. I was actually thinking about it. I was like, what was it that was so magical? And I was like, there was no stress
Mm.
in what he was doing. It was so relaxed.
Hmm.
And then somehow it allowed our bodies to really not fight as well. We just
Mm.
matched that.
That's so beautiful. Do you know what it was? Do you think it was just time in, like time in practice for
It's
him? Or
time in practice.
yeah, right on. Who was it? Do you mind if I ask?
Sharat Joyce.
Oh wow, I don't know that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This was unexpected.
Yeah, very unexpected, very
Wow,
sudden.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, but time in, um, so maybe you can speak to that.
I think there's no substitute for experience and of the people I've worked with, both teachers, but also just all of us who are in practice. It's like there's just no better teacher than having made mistakes and messed up and been like, wow, I was holding a little bit too tight there,
Mm,
or I need to tighten it up. I was a little too loose there. Like anytime, I don't know about you. I mean, I'm 47 and I'm, I'm just getting to the point where I'm like, okay, I've been down this road at
hmm,
least a couple times and it's humbling. But I know more and more what I need. And there's something for me of I've just tried to stay awake through
yeah.
the decades of like, can I just at least, even when I'm flailing, can I take in the actual information that I'm getting in relationship when I'm teaching, what works, what doesn't? And yeah, I think time in. I don't know about you. I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a meditation retreat with this person named Kamala Masters, great teacher, and her partner Steve Armstrong, and they are in the Vipassana tradition, and they had a retreat that they would do. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they do 10-day retreats up at Cloud Mountain in outside of Tacoma in Washington State. And on day, I think it's like day 6 or 7, they they bring in for lunch a bunch of baked brownies, freshly baked brownies, and a whole bunch of ice cream. And this is after like 7 days of pretty austere, like just
Like,
tofu and people just wow, they just lose it. I mean, everyone has different experiences. I think some people are like, this is awesome. Other people are really upset and like, hey, why did you bring this in? This is so triggering. And so to me, there's something important about getting to go through those experiences and know it and stay awake. Steve made the point later. He goes, how many of you actually tasted the dessert? And I realized I'd missed it. And so to me, it's time in, but it's also like time in with paying attention. Like if I eat a bite of the brownie and I really am there for it, it fills me up on some level. But if I miss it, it's not
mm,
time in. It's time in on one level, but it's not a deeper mindful time in, which I think holds a lot more water inside of our psyche. So
yeah.
anyway, that's what I think about time in. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's paying attention. Yeah, paying attention. And there's just something about staying in this work over many years, I think that changes you. Like there's there's no substitute for years, I guess, and
Absolutely.
experiences because they
Definitely.
just keep informing you and like you said, like in a way you're like circling back to this knowledge that you already know. And when you're talking about that, it made me think about like that move that we can have as teachers of like um, feeling like we've got this and then feeling like lost again,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and wondering like where did those like decades go? I know I knew something, and then maybe there's a point where we get used to that cycle, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's not so shocking. Like, oh, okay, I'm in that vulnerability, unknowing part again.
Mm-hmm. I know for me, the more time I've had in teaching, the easier it is to improvise and be open to both the edge cases and also just being more and more present. I think for the first couple of years, I was just pretty gripped trying to convey material and stay present. And I was so gripped. And I really have appreciated having some more reps in because I'm
Yeah.
just more relaxed and I can respond and be even more creative. Like, wow, I something comes out of my mouth that I didn't expect. And I like what I did. And anyway, so I do think there's just no substitute. We just got to do it. Just like my friend is becoming a therapist. There's just no substitute for the reps in and the hours in. And It's a lot of
Yeah.
work.
So you were talking before about like keep tuning in to feet on the ground, butt in the chair, just noticing what's happening here. And that, folks can be both in conversation with someone else, attentive to them, and watching what's happening in their own selves. And that's one way of being mindful. And it also sounded to me like you were talking about grounding when you were talking about like my feet are on the floor. Um, are there some other practices or skills that you can share with folks to help
Yeah.
them become a little more awake?
Yeah, sure. Well, it gets back to what we were talking about earlier with somatic experiencing and focusing on not necessarily focusing immediately on what's difficult, but purposefully shifting your attention to something that's actually more grounding or more, you call it resourcing, like providing us a sense of well being and ease. I think there's something really special and important about learning how to do that. Again, not to avoid difficulty at all, but actually being able to increase the capacity to be with challenge. So, for example, you could do it right now. I have just behind us at the computer, there's a beautiful Japanese maple tree that's the leaves are changing. And so we can do that in any room that we're in. We can focus on something outside of us. In this case, it's something in nature, but it could be something in the room, something that's pleasant. And we can really hone our attention there. And I think that's actually a really powerful skill to have, to purposely cultivate a sense of resource as opposed to just kind of a bare open monitoring attention back, just seeing what comes. It's like we're steering the boat a little bit. Ultimately, we have to let go. But being able to steer a little bit, I think, is incredibly helpful. So that's one practice that I've been working with. You can do that with internal anchors, meaning like you could focus on something inside the body that actually feels supportive, resourcing, or something outside the body as well. So we can just play with it and toggle around.
Mm. Yeah, I'm looking at it. Some beautiful snow.
Oh, are you? Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right, yeah,
And the snow, all the roofs and the trees with the snow. And I find that very peaceful. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And sometimes it's just allowing that, allowing ourselves to take that in and enjoy it.
Absolutely. This was a big piece of Rick Hanson's work of savoring, where he
Mm,
talks about that ability to, and that's where mindfulness is so handy. It's like, okay, I'm checking out the snow. I'm feeling some calm. Let me actually just hang out with that for a moment, which is actually a big part of trauma work. Is in trauma, in my experience, people are stuck. You could think of it like a season, thinking of winter. Usually we have the seasons just cycle, but with trauma, something can happen with post traumatic stress or PTSD where there's a stuckness in the system, something's unintegrated or not metabolized. And there's all these strategies to get that moving again, to have spring come back. But a big tool or competency is being able to notice the moments when movement happens, even in micro movements. So, say I'm someone who feels totally constricted in my chest and then I have a moment of opening, then using mindfulness to focus there, being present, open with it. That's key for reminding the whole psychobiology that there is the possibility of movement. And that
yes.
can actually I think it supports movement at a more general level. So that's where, again, mindfulness is so important when it comes to actual like trauma healing and
Mm.
recovery.
So putting the focus on something that might feel really small and could have been lost. Um, Noticing that even though there might be a stuckness in a season, as you called it, it's not all one thing. Kind of like that reminds me of like the MBSR, where it's like you look at the pain and you notice that it's not just this one thing, but there's tingling, there's heat, there's, you
Mhm.
know, it there's more in there, and that's why it's effective to look at it.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. Like you're actually learning, right? There's space around the edges. My trauma informed yoga teachers that I've met talk about trying to find a sensation where there is a sense of stability or resource, and then almost like islands that are connecting over time, like that one island can spread. And it's not
Mm,
always with the intention that to try to feel better, or it's not that. I don't mean it that way. And it can be useful sometimes to actually have at least one part of the body that feels somewhat grounding and resourced. Sometimes that's not even possible itself, but yeah, I love that spreading. And then just being wise. That's the wisdom of the path to me, is learning then how to actually navigate that terrain. It's not easy.
mm. Can you speak to some other exercises for folks that are practicing mindfulness that might be feeling like they're getting stuck like you were?
Well, the main thing that I do is around modifications to practice, as you know. Um, that I got to interview Tara Brock as a part of this training that you were in, that you mentioned, and I got to ask her this question around being with and working with. This will get to your point around practices, but I asked her about that, and my takeaway from what she said was basically she is teaching people to be with, and if they cannot, then she is helping them to work with it, bringing in some additional practices, competencies, interventions. And what I loved about that is it's not trying to reinvent the contemplative practice you're offering. So if you're a yoga teacher, it's like do yoga and let that be at the center. We're not trying to do trauma therapy. And same with meditation, people can hear the work and think, okay, I have to become a trauma therapist. I think it's the contrary. It's like you're leading with
Mm,
the skills that you have. And then, of course, if someone can't do it, then you're offering modifications. But at the end of the day, the power is in the practice. So, in terms of other practices that I'll offer, it would be, simple modifications like opening the eyes, shifting the posture, different breath patterns, things like that.
yeah.
And that can go anywhere, and that can go further into like, here's some different, more advanced practices around body scans and, working with othering and belonging in practice, working with inner awareness. Like there's so many different avenues we can go down, but
Yeah.
really I'm just trying to offer basic modifications at first so that people can practice, because that to me is where the magic happens.
Yeah, I jumped up because that's how I feel about yoga. It's like, you know, it's so folks can stay in the room because we
Yeah.
know that the practice works and it's so beneficial. And I think what we both saw in our practices is that the teachers were like you said earlier, just, do more of that, or they didn't really know what to say or what to do. So many doctors, like physical doctors, are sending people, go do yoga, go do meditation.
Mhm.
And they don't realize that there are so many different types, there are so many different teachers, and someone can go and have one bad experience, and unfortunately they never try these beautiful wisdom practices ever again, because they didn't, it didn't work that one time. So I think what we're trying to do is help people to stay in the room so that they can enjoy the benefits of these beautiful practices.
Absolutely. And it's not like a white knuckle grip, stay in the room no matter what. The way I hear you say it, it's like, we're going to give you tools and modifications to help you stay here, to support what it is that you long for
Yeah.
inside of your practice, whatever that is. So yeah, no, I love that frame. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, and some people sometimes staying in the room is like go and leave and come back. And I
Yeah,
talk
right.
about
And if
that a
they got right.
lot. The permission to leave and exit and come back. I mean, I've had a few experiences myself where I've been dysregulated and I managed to come back in the room, which is often the most frightening thing because you feel dumb, or you feel like, especially once you're a teacher, quote unquote teacher, and you have to do that. But to have a room that feels welcoming enough that someone can leave and feel like they can walk back in, like to me, that's what this work is about.
Yeah, I love it. And a lot of the teachers I work with, it's about finding the balance between people can leave for sure. And then there's the encouragement to come back. And so what's the tension point? Like, it's not just a free for all,
Right.
as we've talked about, like it's a fine balance of some structure and rigor, but also choice. It's just this constant dance, and
Yeah.
every room's going to be different. Every session class totally different. So it's wild.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you were the one that I learned this from, but talking about like the exact thing that someone needs to feel safe is the thing that makes someone else feel unsafe.
Yeah,
So
that's yeah.
when you're working in groups, that's really tricky because someone needs everyone still and someone needs to walk around to feel regulated.
This is the high wire act to me of
Yeah.
when you do anything in front of a group. It's so tricky. And I think there's something about being, I'll say for myself, just the humility of being like, we can't meet everyone's needs. I actually took a
Yeah.
really deep dive into this at some point around disability justice and just trying to understand ableism and how different bodies work and how we do. And of the people, these were disabled folks who were having deep conversations about this, about how to work with the body skillfully. And one of the main takeaways from working with a couple people was it's okay to say we can't get everyone's needs met at the
Yeah.
same time. Like there's something so just honest about that. Like we're in a material world where we can't, that we'll try our best in the same way we can't create a safe space per se. It's like, yeah, we'll do our best, but people can
Yeah.
still get triggered and feel unsafe. And so, what are we promising? And just being real about that. I think people relax around that, just being
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. Not overpromising,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, you're so great with that, just hearing as many voices as you can and um that humility of like, I'm a person, you know.
Yeah,
I'm I'm studied, I'm skilled, and I'm human. And when you're, in a Zoom room with 100 or more, which you often are, there's a lot of different needs in that space, and there's a limited time.
absolutely.
So we have to set some kind of realistic parameters about what we can do.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like I watched your journey a little bit, like releasing the 2 trainings, sort of the general training and the advanced training, and then your podcast where you said, "I'm gonna disappear for a little while." And you did some traveling, and it sounds like you did some, like, thinking and rethinking, like, and this is another thing I just really respect and learn from, just from watching you, is, like, that. I thought that was so brave. Um, and it seems like you're saying, like, I took this work sort of as far as I could, and in some ways it was going even further than I had wanted it to, and I needed to step back and see, like, what's my next contribution. Am I getting it right?
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I haven't had that mirrored back. It did feel like that. It was like I was like, what? I had just hit a point where I'm like, I don't know how to go deeper here. And it's all with the courses being up online. In some ways, that's like, here's my best thinking, and then people are doing really really awesome creative thinking and taking it in their own directions. As I imagine, you're on your own path, and I love that. That gets me excited. There's no one way. And yeah, it was a pause. It was definitely a pause to just let it go fallow for a minute and see what came back. And what came back was actually still feeling inspired to want to be in this particular space. And exactly, I'm still in the question about what's needed. What are the tools? I'm actually going to do a program in January in 2025 around internal family systems and trauma sensitive mindfulness, because it's something I'm really interested in. Of It's been a really helpful map, IFS, or internal family systems. You probably know it. It's a great therapeutic approach around working with parts of ourselves. And when I've learned about it, I'm like, this is amazing. This is really cool work that's super practical. And so that was for me, like, it was almost an adjacent path of like, okay, here's the work, but then what conversations can I be in with skilled people all over the world that's really just trying to kick the ball down the field of us having the tools that we need to deal with the world that we're in. Because I don't know about you, but I don't know what's going to happen this next 5, 10 years. It feels like we're getting into uncharted territory around pace, around algorithms, and I want to be as resourced as possible. So that's where
Yeah.
I'm heading right now, is like trying to find the branches that were over here on the tree and trying to make connections there.
And so was IFS something that you had been working with for a while, or was it a new interest?
Most honestly, it had been personal therapy where I had done a couple friends that were IFS practitioners or therapists had they had been telling me about the model, and that the more they talked about it, the more I'm like, this makes so much sense. And went to an IFS therapist for a little bit and I loved it. I thought it was great. And it really gave me a framework to work with that I still do and I love, which is instead of, you might have heard this, but the difference between speaking for a part versus from it. Meaning, if I have a part that's scared, instead of just being scared, I can connect with the part, see what it needs, and advocate for it in the world instead of just acting out from it. So it's like speaking for it. So even when I'm with someone I love, if we're having a hard conversation, I'd say something like, part of me's scared or part of me's angry
Mm,
instead of just like, I'm pissed at you or whatever. It just creates some space that I think also happens in mindfulness. There's this little bit of distance. And so there's a lot of overlap, but there's also some parts that are just really interesting in conversation. I got to interview Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, and I was like, it was so fascinating and cool. So no, mostly it's been a personal journey. And the teachers that I know who use it, they just seem, I mean, you offered me that compliment earlier about feeling grounded. The people that I know who are IFS practitioners just seem really good. They seem quite
mm.
solid and in themselves, and they know how to work with themselves relationally. So I'm really interested in the intersection of mindfulness, trauma, and IFS. Like, how do they go together? Will that be a tool in the toolkit for some of us? I think it's great. So that's what I'm doing. Do you know it? Do you know that work?
I know parts work, on a surface level. I've never done like
Yeah, me
a
too.
yeah, a long course in it, but, I understand the basic concept of recognizing these different parts, and I have done a course with somatic experiencing on focusing and attachment
Oh,
theory,
cool. Oh, cool.
and focusing is quite similar.
Yes.
Have you heard of it? Okay.
Yeah. Genlin, is that who it was? And
Um,
or
what's
I
her
think
name?
anyway, that's how I learned it was something Genlin. But yes, I've heard the focusing, the whole institute. It's amazing. It's totally overlaps with a lot of what we're talking about here.
You look at you can either, call something in, like something you're struggling with, or you can tune into the body, as we often do in somatics, um, and you can feel like you can get an image or a feeling. Sometimes it's a sound, and you can be with that, and then through the practice, see what it wants to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so useful. It's so
Yeah,
pragmatic. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. It's
And then
great.
sometimes the message that you're getting, like, or the visual changes. Um, Sometimes it moves, and then sometimes another part pops up, and it needs attention, and then you can work with different parts that are wanting different things from you.
So great. It's
Does
awesome.
that feel like a kind of accurate?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so. I think that's also in the working with bucket of
yeah.
being able to purposely, it's not just bare awareness of what's happening. It's like I'm actually engaging purposefully in some ways with sensations and experiences to elicit information. So it's you're in the driver's seat in that way, even though I know none of us are in the driver's seat. Like life's happening. So yeah, no, I love that. I think it's great.
So what is this project coming up, and how are these three things, trauma and IFS and mindfulness, gonna come together?
I don't know yet. I don't totally, I mean, I have a sense of it because I've been starting. I'm co-teaching it with a friend and colleague who's an IFS therapist, and every conversation we always have just ends up feeling really synergistic and exciting. And so I don't totally know how they're all going to come together, but the thought is the more that any of us understand the map of our internal landscape and the parts that are there, the more effective that we'll be in whatever role we're in. I mean, that could be a partner, a teacher, a coach, therapist, it's all these different places. So I'm not totally sure how they're going to come together, but I trust that they will. And I'm working on it this weekend coming up. So
And this is a training in January.
yeah, we're doing a live training. So it'll be 4 different parts in January. And it's on my website if people are interested. But yeah, we'll do four live sessions on there for people that want to just take a dive into like what's trauma sensitive mindfulness in relation to internal family systems.
Yeah. I'm really interested in this, because especially with trauma, parts tend to split off a little more, or there's a
Yes,
different dynamic between them.
100%. Well, actually, though, this is interesting because when I talked to Dick Schwartz about this, the founder of IFS, he would not say that you need to do anything differently
Okay.
with trauma, which is challenges a lot of what I had come up with. We're like, okay, now that we're into trauma realm, we're now needing to do some different interventions, which that's just how I was trained. And he's like, no, on some level, as long as what he calls self, which has these
Mm.
qualities of compassion, courage, as long as self is in contact with any of the parts that are impacted by trauma, it's all good. And you can invite parts to turn up, turn down the intensity of the sensations that are there. Like he was talking about, this is why I'm excited. It's like there was a level of nuance there that I did not know, and I was really interested in it. So that's where it's going to go.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, it should be great.
Yeah. And for folks who don't know, like, there's this idea in IFS that there's different parts of us, and I think we sort of explained that, right? With
Yeah.
there's a part of me that's scared right now, and folks can dig in a little more through your course, or there's even some basic books on. There are some general categories of parts that most people have, right? There's
Yeah.
like protector parts and little child parts, and they have different needs. And then the way that you can tell if you're working with a part or with what's called self. Do you know the C's? I think they're,
Yeah. I
do
don't
you
know
know
them all.
them?
No, I don't remember them all.
What
Like
are some of them? It's like,
courageous, compassionate, caring. Gosh, really can't remember them all.
yeah,
Yeah,
I know I can't either, but there's a way to check in and see if you're dealing with a part or
exactly.
what they would call in that model the self,
Yeah.
which is I guess, yeah, we'll have to study more to to learn what the self is.
Yeah, he talks about it as it's we all have it. It's the sun that's behind the clouds in some ways. Like it's
Mm,
just what's there. And yeah, that when the self, that we all, if we're either part led or self led. That's how I hear him talk about that. And if we get enough distance from the parts, self emerges. And when self emerges, it can really heal parts. They're in
mm,
relationship with us as opposed to just flailing around and feeling really scared and isolated. It's such a intuitive model. I mean, he got it from family systems and applied it over, but it's so interesting to me.
yeah. When you said about the sun, it made me think about all those images that we use in yoga and yoga philosophy about the weather and
Yeah, right.
um, you know that there's something there which is calm and spacious and not touched by those other things that remains the same and steady.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
tuning into that. I think that's what we're trying to do with all these practices.
I agree. I agree. And then just living our lives, and who knows what's going to happen next. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, the thing about things being so extra, kind of feeling that uncertain, um, maybe is that it reminds us that things are always uncertain.
that's the scary part to me. Like I'm not in control. Oh my god.
Just taking that in from you, because I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah. It's heavy. It's the big one.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. What's worked for what's helped me with that a lot is I did a course to become a death doula.
Oh, cool. Oh,
Um,
it's so important, that work.
and that's helped me to live more in that uncertainty and impermanence. But you're right, we don't know. There's a lot coming that's, and they talk about exponential change, so things are changing faster than ever. And so you're right, the more we can connect to self, to find some center in that storm, that's going to be really valuable for all of us.
100%. Definitely.
David, this has been like so touching for me to spend this time with you. Are there some things that we didn't cover that you want to share about your work?
That felt like a nice arc, that conversation ending with death there. That's really sweet. So that feels good to me. And yeah, if anyone wants to learn more about my work, there's my website. It's davidtreleaven.com. And there's some free resources on there and podcasts and things like that. So I'm proud of what's up there and if people want to go deeper. But yeah, mostly just thanks for the work you're doing and onwards. Here we go. Let's keep
There we
going.
go.
And yeah, just appreciate all you're up to.
Can folks still take your course through your
Yeah, that's still
site?
up there. We did
Okay.
yeah, there's a comprehensive training for people that want to become trained in trauma sensitive mindfulness as a yoga teacher or meditation teacher. It's like a I mean, you took it's like a semester long course. It's long.
Yeah.
and you get CEUs for it. But anyway, yeah, if that's of interest, please anytime. And I'm always around for questions if people have me used right on the website. So yeah, but thanks for asking.
Yeah, well, your course is fantastic. There are
Thank you.
PDFs and
Yeah, there's so
uh,
much,
there's so
so many
much.
layers. Yeah.
It's you definitely give people like full value, and
No, thanks.
no,
Appreciate that.
you really put a lot into it, and it's much appreciated and seen.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you so much, David. I hope we're able to stay in touch and keep growing and evolving together.
Me too. Thanks.